Hi everyone, welcome back to Lifting the Lamp. I'm Frater Eleftheria, and you'll remember if you watched my last video, I spoke about astral projection, some of my astral projection experiences, and a little bit of information about the way that time behaved differently when I was projecting my astral body and the way that I was actually able to travel through time as I astrally projected. And I thought it would be interesting to kind of explore that a little bit more. Some of the explanation behind why that might be possible. So, the relationship between space and space-time and the astral dimension. And I also wanted to share with you some of my other stories where I have attempted to look into the future, either through astral projection or some other means, and what I saw when I attempted those exercises. So those are the stories I'm going to share with you tonight. I hope that you enjoy them, and I hope you enjoy this video exploring the relationship between astral travel and time travel. So in my last video, which I will link in the description below, I talked about how I went to a float tank in 2018, decided to do an astral travel experiment, and found that I was able to travel to an event that was happening in the world on that day and accurately describe the event, but I had actually projected 3 hours into the future, and how this puzzled me at the time. And then as I came to realize more about the nature of time, I realized why this might be possible. And I also realized that there were other people who gave accounts of their own astral travel experiences who likewise had found that there was a kind of time disparity that they experienced, expecting to be in one time and finding themselves in another as they projected. So it would seem that it is possible that by projecting the astral body, you can move instantaneously not only through space, but through time. Now, how is this possible? Well, the first thing we need to do to understand it is to challenge our preconceived ideas about space and time and the relationship between the two. As I touched on in my last video, physics has taught us some very interesting things about the nature of time. There's an idea in particular in physics called the relativity of simultaneity, which is the idea that there can be two people situated at different points in space observing the same event, but one of them is observing that event in the other person's past, because time doesn't occur the same everywhere, but is actually distorted and varies based on your frame of reference within space. To illustrate this by way of example, which is often used to illustrate the relativity of simultaneity, if you've got a person who's standing at a stop at a train station and a train goes past and is struck, the front and the back of the train carriage is struck by lightning at the same time, then from the vantage point of the person who is standing on the platform, those bolts of lightning will both hit the front and back of the carriage at the same time. But from the point of view of the conductor of the train moving towards the lightning bolt at the front of the train, the lightning bolt at the front will actually strike before the bolt at the back strikes, because of the speed at which light travels and the relative distance that the light has to travel in both cases. So just because one person's moving very quickly through space, time behaves differently. And so what this means is that our concept of time is relative, and our past might be another person's present, our future might be another person's present. And so, in effect, the past, present, and future are all happening at the same time. Now think about this. If you had a method that allowed you to instantaneously move from one point in space to another in a way that was not bound by the ordinary laws of physics, wouldn't it also follow that potentially you could travel instantaneously from one point in time to another, even across very wide stretches of time? Well, that's what this concept seems to suggest. When you move into the astral dimension and you move into spiritual dimensions, you're really moving beyond fourth dimensional space-time, and you're moving much closer to that state of oneness before everything gets sort of, folded up into different dimensions. When you're able to reach that state, from there, the past and the future are very easy to access through the astral dimension of that past and future. And once I realized this, that this was for real, of course I was very keen to see how far I could push this idea of using astral travel to travel through time. And I've made a few attempts at either traveling into the future or looking into the future via the astral dimension. And I'm going to tell you a little bit of what I saw. So the first time I really tried this wasn't so much an astral travel experiment, but it was a meditation that I was in. I decided that I wanted to try and send my consciousness 100 years into the future and see what the world looked like. And I remember that there was this metropolis that I saw. And the first thing that I noticed was that the light was very bright, that the sunlight was incredibly bright. It was like the scene almost seemed overexposed because of how bright the sun was shining. And I remember seeing these giant solar sails, which kind of, they had a kind of bat wing look to them, they looked like that. And they were golden in colour, and there were these massive sails that were collecting sunlight. And I remember that the buildings were sort of similar to kind of modern or contemporary buildings, but the architecture was a lot more sleek, otherwise quite similar to our time. But I remember noticing that there weren't that many aeroplanes around. But rather people seemed to get around. If they wanted to travel very long distances, they seemed to get around by way of a bullet train, an extremely fast bullet train, and did that rather than travelling through the air. And I remember hearing the language that people were speaking, and it sounded like English, but it was different. It was like English, but there were a lot of loan words from other languages, particularly a lot of sort of Japanese sounding words. And there were sort of so many loan words from other languages that this English that people were speaking had almost morphed into a different language. But that's what people were speaking. And the other thing that I noticed was that the people in this time, they were quite happy. They had a good quality of life. But at the same time, there was an underlying and very deeply buried sense of guilt over a cataclysm that had happened to people in the rest of the world, other parts of the world where millions of lives had been lost, and the people living in this city sort of felt responsible for, or their families had been responsible indirectly for those lives not being saved, and they carried that guilt with them very, very strongly. But it was something that you're not really supposed to talk about. So that was 100 years into the future. But there was another time that I projected my consciousness even further into the future, 300 years in fact. And I was able to see even more things. And then I saw many different scenes and intuited a lot of different information. And as with the previous meditation, I sort of just let the images come. I didn't try and force anything. I just wanted to see what would pop into my head. And one of the first things that I saw was that this society was much more ecologically conscious. There seemed to be a lot more synergy between the natural world and the sort of urban and suburban spaces that people had constructed. I saw a number of houses and a sort of a neighbourhood. It almost looked like the Shire, like from Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit, with those sort of domed houses with all the greenery around. But it was a lot more technological, obviously. But almost like a return to a kind of simplicity and a closeness to nature, rather than, the kind of ruthless urbanization, paving everything in concrete, making everything cubical and grey and soulless. It was almost like a reversal of the trend for the last 250 years. In terms of how the world was governed, I saw that there was a world government of sorts, but it was not the model of government that certain vested interests are trying to establish at the moment. It wasn't like a top-down, technocratic, totalitarian state that controlled everybody. It was a lot more decentralized and a lot more democratic than that. And so what I kind of saw was that the way that this world government had come about was basically that as different countries made treaties with each other, it created more and more little connections between different nations. And then this nation would have a connection with this nation over here. This nation would have a connection here. And so there was a proliferation of all of these different connections between nations through treaties, until there were so many different connections that were made that every country related to every other country in some way and had some mutual beneficial interest with another country in some way, so that if any country were to act out in an aggressive way, it would end up having a detrimental effect on every country. And so in this way, by creating a web of alliances that was so complex that basically everyone was allied to everybody else on some level, it was a way that a kind of, a peaceful governance framework for the world was able to emerge. And we already see the beginnings of that. But this is much more advanced. And it wasn't just nation states that had these kinds of agreements between each other. There were a lot of non-state actors involved, and actually international communities which sort of had their own kind of stake in this as well. So it was a very horizontal kind of a system of government in that sense. Everyone was doing their own thing, but there was this kind of mutually acknowledged idea that everyone relied on everybody else. There was one message that I got as I looked 300 years into the future that was emphasized a lot, and that was that the nurseries are important. So I was told that there were these buildings or institutions known as nurseries, and basically what they were kind of part greenhouse, part seed bank. They were kind of artificially constructed environments that would allow for not only the preservation of different seeds, but also the cultivation of different kinds of plant life. inside this little domed oasis. And so these nurseries are something that we will need to create in the future to preserve different plant species, and they're going to become very important in the future. That is a message that I was given very strongly. And biodiversity is important. Having different kinds of plants is important. They keep the ecosystem healthy. Loss of biodiversity can lead to the collapse of different ecosystems. It can lead to collapse in food systems as well. It can have a lot of negative effects, very negative environmental impacts. We really don't realize how important it is to preserve certain plant species, and it will become all too apparent in the future that that's something that we need to do. So we just need to start preparing as soon as possible. The sooner we can start to create these nurseries, the better. So yeah, it seems that the future won't be without its challenges and won't be without its cataclysms, but we seem to get through it in the end. But having a healthier relationship with nature seemed to be a theme, and having a more kind of decentralized, democratic, horizontal form of leadership and government seemed to also be a strong theme that was coming through as well, of big transformations that would happen over the next few hundred years. The other kind of odd sort of experience I had looking into the future was an astral projection experience. I tried to project myself 1,000 years into the future on planet Earth to see what I could see. And this one was unusual. I remember seeing myself in a parkland. It looked pretty similar to what you might expect in our own time. But there was some kind of big ship overhead, like flying through the sky, like, something like, I don't know, like a Star Destroyer or something from Star Wars, but it was sort of quite rectangular shaped. It's, this big ship flying through the air. And I also remember that there was like, it was as though everything was kind of semi-transparent. All of the trees and things that I saw, all of the features of the landscape had this sort of spectral look to them, and there were kind of like different features of the environment phasing in and out, almost like there were 2 or 3 kind of realities all superimposed on each other. And so what this seemed to be showing me, at least this is my interpretation of it, is that there's a certain level of uncertainty in the space-time continuum, and that because the future is uncertain, it doesn't quite exist in the fixed way that the past and the present do. It's almost like the way that a photon has an uncertain kind of specific location in space before the wave of the photon collapses into a particle. It's got that indeterminacy, and it can seem to be multiple places at once. It's almost like there's an indeterminacy in the space-time of the future as well. It hasn't quite collapsed into one possibility or the other. So it's all kind of happening simultaneously, but only as a probability. So that was my interpretation of what I saw anyway. So those are my insights into what I saw in the future for the world and for the human race, based on my astral projection experiments and moving my consciousness through time. And it's occurred to me now, I've been talking about how I wish I knew what I was supposed to do, blah, 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 blah. I wish I knew exactly what the future had in store for me. Maybe I need to do some of these exercises to see what's going to happen there. But I imagine it's not that simple. there's probably going to be something stopping me from seeing that, but it's worth a shot. But anyway, I've demonstrated that it is possible to kind of see into different times as well as different places when you are doing experiments with astral projection. So yeah, that's potentially an area where experimentation with astral travel it has not really been pushed to its full potential. But those are my experiences. What are your experiences with astral travel? Have you gained any insights into the nature of time on your own journey? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my channel. Like the video as well. You can subscribe to me on Odyssey. And if you want to give me extra support, please also hit join to become a member, or hit the thanks button down below to send me super thanks. But thanks again for listening, and I'll see you next time.